Hi, I made this video following a squabble on the comments thread elsewhere on YouTube in which Christians yet again peddled all manner of half-truths about the historicity of Jesus. I'm going to start with my personal conclusion on that subject. My inclination is that it's more likely than not that somebody called Jesus was around at the time in question and inspired and influenced some people. What I object to, though, is the assertion by Christians that this is somehow indisputable, proven, and better evidence than all manner of other historical figures. They present the issue as if it's not open to question. Of course, many are convinced it's accurate because that's what they've been taught, and the received wisdom for people has been such that it's not often challenged. They are wrong, and those that have looked into it properly and still maintain those assertions are kidding themselves or are dishonest. I want to start with two brief thoughts about the nature of evidence. The courts in civilized countries have been wrestling with the issue of evidence and proof for centuries and are a good reference point. In British and American criminal cases, and many others, the burden is to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. That, broadly speaking, is the type of standard that science will apply before asserting something as an absolutely proven fact. For instance, the laws of gravity are now so clear that they are beyond any reasonable doubt. Civil cases, however, as opposed to criminal, will usually be decided on the balance of probabilities, that is, 51% or more likely than not. We talk about cases on the basis of being proven, but it's important to keep in mind it's a legal construct. Being proven on the balance of probabilities is not the same as being proven beyond reasonable doubt, and in common English parlance, something proven needs to be beyond just 51%. If something is only on the balance of probabilities, then you may well accept it, as scientists would, as the best explanation available at the moment, but you have to, if you are honest and reasonable, recognize that there is significant doubt and keep a very much open mind on the issue. Demonstrating that Jesus existed on the balance of probabilities is a long, long way from proving beyond reasonable doubt that he existed. The second point I want to make about evidence is about hearsay, and I speak from knowledge of the English legal system here, but similar provisions apply in many other jurisdictions. Hearsay is second-hand evidence. If I witness a car accident, I can give first-hand evidence as to what I saw take place. If I come on the scene, however, moments later, and the driver explains to me what happened, I can give first-hand evidence as to what he said, but at best second-hand or hearsay evidence as to what actually happened. It will be immediately apparent that hearsay evidence is not as reliable as first-hand evidence. In a criminal case, where somebody's liberty or life is at stake, not, I hasten to add, their eternal soul, and where a matter is to be proven beyond reasonable doubt, then hearsay evidence is not allowed. The courts recognize the dangers of such evidence and its potentially prejudicial unreliability, and it is excluded from the vast majority of criminal proceedings because it cannot be trusted. In civil cases, it's different. Hearsay evidence can be admitted, but special notice has to be given to opponents, and there is specific provision for a judge to give it such weight as appears appropriate in all the circumstances. Often, that means very little weight at all. Again, hearsay evidence is treated with extreme caution, and no competent lawyer would want to go to trial relying primarily on hearsay evidence. It's a recipe for disaster, because the weight that will be given to it by the court is likely to be very limited, with good reason. So, bear those in mind, bear those ideas in mind, and we'll get on to Jesus. Here's the first and biggest point, which seems to be known by few, acknowledged by fewer, lied about by many, but it's massively important. There is no contemporaneous evidence for the existence of Jesus outside of the Bible. None. Zilch. Bugger all. Indeed, there's no evidence in the Bible either, given that the first Gospel is thought to have been written 30 years after the crucifixion, and the authorship is not entirely clear, but certainly doesn't appear to have been by an eyewitness. But that, I suppose, is another issue. I'm going to put it to one side for now, Inevitably, religious writings and teaching promoting the cult of Christ were written as such by believers, and not as objective, dispassionate histories. That's a subject for another day, and not the purposes of this particular video. In this video, what I want to do is set out a broad and pretty superficial account of some of the key points that don't seem to be popularly recognised or appreciated about the historicity of Jesus. There are many good texts and writings about the subject, and I would urge people to read them and think for themselves about what they say. This video is intended as a flag, as much as anything else, of those issues, and perhaps a starting point for people to go and look into these things properly themselves. So, what do we have? Well, firstly, it's worth noting what we don't have. No records of birth, death, execution, trial. No contemporaneous comments or views of other people writing at the time, historians writing at the time, records of ancient Rome, or anything else. Inevitably, records from that time are sketchy, and absence of proof isn't proof of absence. But the closest we get to evidence is probably the writings of Josephus, who wrote long and detailed histories, and specifically a history of the Jews. The most quoted passage of the two, which may be relevant here, is this: "Now there was about this time Jesus, a wise man, if it be lawful to call him a man, for he was a doer of wonderful works, a teacher of such men as receive the truth with pleasure. He drew over to him both many of the Jews and many of the Gentiles. He was the Christ, and when Pilate, at the suggestion of the principal men among us, had condemned him to the cross, those that loved him at the first did not forsake him, for he appeared to them alive again the third day, as the divine prophets had foretold these and 10,000 other wonderful things concerning him, and the tribe of Christians so named from him are not extinct at this day." Powerful passage if it's true. First point, this text was published in 93 AD. That is around 60 years after the crucifixion, and Josephus was not an eyewitness on any analysis. So even if this passage is genuine, it is at best hearsay evidence. 60 years after the event, in circumstances where there must have been a growing cult of Christ which was being disseminated at the time. Second point, scholars widely recognise the very significant possibility that this passage has been the subject of amendment and later interpolation by Christians looking to support their faith. Josephus appears to describe Jesus here as divine, which is problematic on two counts. Firstly, if he was a believer, then he was not being objective. He was not a dispassionate historian. Secondly, he was not actually a believer. He was a Pharisaic Jew. Furthermore, as Raphael Lataster explains in his book, "There was no Jesus, there is no God," the early Christian theologian, one of the leading figures in that regard at the time, Origen, specifically commented that Josephus did not believe that Jesus was the Christ, which makes no sense at all if the versions of Josephus available to Origen at that time said to the contrary, as the versions that we now have appear to do. So, Josephus not contemporaneous, not an eyewitness, and quite possibly fraudulent in any event. Certainly the broad scholarly opinion is that the passage has, to some extent, whether complete or in part, been the subject of amendment and interpolation. The next most quoted evidence is Tacitus, a Roman historian who refers to Christus, who suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of Pontius Pilate. Again, it's a pretty powerful passage if we can trust it, because it echoes so closely some of the details in the Bible. But again, this is not contemporaneous nor first-hand. It again bears hallmarks of later interpolation. And again, Origen does not refer to it in his writings. The name Jesus is never used, and it's unlikely that a non-Christian believer would refer to Jesus only as Christ, because that name carries with it the acceptance or assumption of divinity. More to the point, This again is long, long after the events in question. This is hearsay evidence written by a historian in a different land, and the obvious conclusion is that it is based on things he has been told or heard at a time when the Christ cult had had many decades to grow. And if one is reporting what one is being told by believers, then it is no surprise that the reporting echoes what is in the Bible and the Gospels and what the believers were in the process of believing. There are a few other sources later still which are referred to by Christians. None are histories or records of Jesus' existence, however, but merely records of the fact that some people were worshipping or devoting themselves to a Christ, which, on any analysis, must have been the case at the time. Let me be clear. I'm not what is known as a mythicist. I don't positively assert that Jesus never existed and is simply a myth. I don't know whether he did or not, though the mythicist hypothesis is clearly not entirely unreasonable or unrealistic. What bothers me is the half-truths and misinformation which is disseminated on the subject in an effort by the faithful to persuade and pretend that there is no reasonable doubt on the issue. There genuinely is. One can make a case to say that, on balance of probabilities, a Jesus existed. I'm pretty much in that camp. But that is a very, very long way from proof in the strictest sense, the sense required to assert that this is a historical fact and beyond reasonable challenge. It's a long way from being able to support the oft-quoted assertion that there is more evidence for Jesus than for Julius Caesar. That assertion is simply nonsense. It may be that there is a greater volume of evidence, but volume and veracity are completely different things, and that distinction is crucial when weighing up the strength of evidence. If you are a believer who repeats these ideas as if they were true, ask yourself before you do so again, how would you feel to live in a country where the courts accepted second and third-hand hearsay evidence from anonymous sources given 60 years or more after the event by people who might have a vested interest? Ask yourself how you would feel to be convicted and to lose your liberty or life on the basis of a scribbled version of that evidence, which might well have been doctored by another interested party. Then, stop peddling the half-truths and have the decency to admit to the people you are speaking to that your belief is based on faith, and that there is, of course, no solid evidence even for the existence of Jesus. By all means say that on balance he probably existed, and that even you know in your heart, because he's spoken to you, that he did. But don't overstep that fine line between your honest conviction and faith and a dishonest dissemination of ignorantly held half-truths and propaganda. Don't tell people that these things are historically proven facts and there's no good cause to doubt them, because there clearly is.